Hello, everybody. My name is Oliver G. This is the Earful Tower podcast where I talk to the people who make the city of light shine. And one such person who's in the studio today, Frank Adrian Barron, who runs the wildly popular social media account Cakeboy Paris, also has a book that came out fairly recently called Sweet Paris, Seasonal Recipes from an American Baker in Paris. Just from that introduction, I think you know what you're in for. Let's introduce him to the studio. Frank, welcome to the studio.
A pleasure to be here. Hi, guys.
It is a pleasure to have you in the studio because it's been, let's see, how far do we go back? And why have you not been in the studio before?
I was just on my way to the studio. I was thinking about that. When was the first time we had a run-in? It had to have been around coffee.
I think so.
Most likely, that's usually where we bump into each other, bakeries and coffee shops.
I don't think there's another person in Paris I bump into as much as you. You and I and your husband and my wife, not so much lately, but we have the same walking tour, casual for pleasure walking tour of the Marais schedule. Same streets. I imagine they're totally different, but they cross at certain places. Ile Saint-Louis, near the Peloton.
Yeah, I think it's like two triangles that are overlapping somehow.
Yeah.
And those are those triangles that we're always bumping into each other.
Yeah. And you've got your lovely little dog. What's the dog's name?
A Fitzy.
Funny Fitzy.
Funny Fitzy.
No, because it's a Boston Terrier, right?
Yeah.
There's another Boston Terrier walking around the area called...
Well, there's another one at Peloton coffee shop that is called Hemingway, and mine is Fitzgerald. So it's quite hilarious when they're two together in the same coffee shop. It's like, Hemingway and Fitzgerald are having a coffee together.
I think Hemingway...
Although they don't get on too well, though, I will say.
In the dog?
Well, they're both boys, and there's a little bit of friction.
Well, the authors didn't get on well as well.
Exactly.
So
which is
it's perfect.
Another layer.
That's a children's book. That's what that is. That's a children's book. Oh my god!
I will wait for you and Lita to do that.
Okay, I'll work on that. So I don't know where you and I started bumping into each other, but I do know. Let's start with a flashback. You and I did it in those early days at the Earful Tower. I used to do these live walk shows. I do far fewer now, but I used to do them a lot. We did one of them, and that's unconventional that you and I did that without you being on the show. So apologies that we never got that order right. But what do you remember? Because this is years and years ago.
Yeah, it was. It was a lifetime ago. It was way before I even had the notion of that I would be doing a cookbook, all of that. But I remember us walking on Rue du Bac.
Yep.
Which is sort of like, I call it one of the sweet streets in Paris. Yep. And there are just chock-a-block of...
Chock-a-block? Did you do that on purpose?
I guess that's an American saying. I don't know.
Chock-a-block. I mean, it's perfect. Yeah, no, we say it too. But
chock-a-block.
It's like chock on every block, basically. Yeah.
So this is that street, Rue du Bac.
And we walked down, and I don't know if you'd prepared it, but I remember going into like Jacques Genin and
back then there was a pastry shop called La Pâtisserie de Rêve that we popped into, which no longer exists.
Yep.
And that they were like famous for their like giant madeleines, and I think we tried some of that, and then Claire Demont pastry shop. So we popped into pastry and chocolate shops, just having nibbles and sort of like talking while
stuffing our face while talking to the people at home. That was a Patreon only video. I'm going to dig it out. I'm going to share it with the members again. But that walk started, I remember really clearly, we were on Rue de Babylone, where Katoum is. And that brings us nicely to the subject of coffee.
Yeah.
Now, you came to Paris 2012?
2012.
And I remember you saying, maybe then or off camera, I remember you telling me that you used to cross town for a cup of coffee.
That is correct.
Yeah, I remember that stuck. It's one of those quotes that stuck in my head.
Coming from San Francisco in 2012, we were spoiled for choices for coffee in San Francisco. And when I landed in Paris 2012, there were not a lot of options for specialty coffee, or as some kids call it, the third wave coffee.
Well, let's get this straight, because I know people will be listening. I've had feedback on it before, and they go, firstly, why are you paying €6 for a cup of coffee? That's ridiculous. And then there are people who are saying, what's the difference? It all tastes the same, more or less. Shall we speak in defense of a good coffee? Do you have anything to say?
I mean, I feel like you as an Australian and your DNA can maybe speak more prominently on the subject of what makes a good cuppa, but especially since I will put that out there to everybody that I usually purely drink cappuccinos, so milk-based coffee. I'm not drinking filter espresso, which a lot of my friends drink.
The real coffee nuts would say, how dare you put milk in it? Although I'm the same. I have a flat white. I don't care what they say. But you know what?
I'm a milk-based coffee guy.
There you go. Yeah, I'm not ashamed of it. I'm going to add, though, I think some people have a thing with coffee where they're like, how can you spend $6 on it or 4 or 5, whatever it is? And I say, since the beginning, I don't go out for lavish lunches and dinner, especially in the beginning when I was really broke in Paris. That was my special hour. And it only cost €6. Thank you very much. So it's rather the opposite. It's not like I'm going out exorbitant prices on wild restaurants. This is my special spot for $6. So if you have a problem with that, put it in writing and send it to somebody else, I say.
Here. Yeah. And more than just the coffee itself, it was for me being an expat, new to Paris, didn't know anybody. Coffee shops in general were a way for me to build community, to meet. That's where I met all my first friends that I'm still friends with, 11 years later.
Right.
It was usually generally sussing out a new coffee shop that had just opened in Paris.
And you came right at the right time because they just kept opening.
And thankfully, my neighborhood, the Marais, Troisième, ended up being sort of just an explosion of now we have the highest concentration of specialty coffee in Paris. Whereas in the beginning, when I first got here, there were none. So I literally, like, as you say, would get on the metro, head over to the 7th to Coutume on Rue Sèvres-Babylon. That was one of my first sort of like favorite spots. But it was a hop, skip, and a jump from where I lived.
Yeah. There'll be people who think it's crazy to cross town for coffee, but I get it. And Coutume, the godfather of the Paris coffee scene, Tom Clark, longtime friend of the show.
Oh, Tom, yeah.
Tom. Okay, so coffee, it's exploded in the Marais. As you started to really work on sweet treats for people to eat, coffee shops were a big part of that too, right?
Yes.
You went and knocked on the door and said...
Well, actually, it was the opposite. A coffee shop knocked on my door because I was not at all trying to sell cakes to anybody.
Right.
And my baking journey started with me wanting to make cakes from back home because I was missing home. It was after a year of being in Paris, and I think it was a bit of a nostalgic thing. Much like you probably can't find a Lamington in Paris.
Oh, here we go. Look at all these references you're doing to Australia. This is great.
I have a whole sweet vocabulary for Australia.
Nice.
We'll get into that later.
Absolutely, yeah.
But I was missing American-style cakes, and what I mean by that are like, coffee cakes and bundt cakes and chocolate cake and these kinds of things and layer cakes, which you don't see in Paris. So I realized that if I wanted to eat these cakes, I needed to bake them myself. And I was not formally a baker in California. I studied art history in college. I was working at a museum in San Francisco.
You know who this reminds me of? Patricia Wells.
Oh.
Art background.
Starts
making the switch to food.
Gets inspired by Paris and food.
Yeah.
And that is my story too.
Okay.
You can't help but be inspired when you're in Paris, living in Paris, and being exposed to all the beautiful pastries, the markets, and just getting inspired to want to get in the kitchen and do something, whether it's savory or sweet, but I chose sweet.
Yeah, but so who knocked on your door then? What happened? Because I know this is in Sweet Paris. This is how the book starts.
Yeah, this is it. Part of the story is in the book, and basically, I used to have a lot of friends come over to my house for cake and coffee or tea. And one of my friends owned a coffee shop in the Marais called Fondation. And his name was Chris Nielsen, a fellow koala, by the way.
Not just that, married to a Swede, just like me.
Married to a Swede.
In Paris. Isn't that wild?
Emily Nielsen, architect.
Yeah.
And we became fast friends, and his coffee shop was one of the new kids on the block across from Square du Temple. And it was a small coffee shop, specialty coffee, and he, of course, made amazing cappuccinos and flat whites.
Yeah.
So they didn't have a kitchen, though, so they required a baker to bring baked goods to the cafe. And it was kind of this weird sort of, I don't know, serendipity that he came over, we tried cake, and it was in the summer, in August, when everything is, closed up. And his bakers were on vacation.
Yes. August, you could see it as the month of opportunity.
Yes. 100%.
Especially if you're not French, because for anyone who doesn't know, everyone in Paris, everyone goes. Everything's shut.
Kickstart projects in August, I say. It's a perfect time to test out a lot of things.
Yeah, and you're Paris. Like all the bakers away. You're like, I'm here.
You're like,
I'm here.
I can do a little something.
Right.
And so that's sort of how it happened. And I ended up having a cake, again, thinking it was a one-off, just a favor. I brought a cake to the cafe, and people liked it. And moreover, people took photos of it.
Right.
And that's, of course, in our world today, photography, social media, other cafe owners in Paris, saw that I'd made this cake, and they started to ask me, like, could you make a cake for us for a weekend pop-up on a Saturday? And of course, I thought it was I was definitely not thinking this was going to lead to anything. I just started to say yes.
Yeah.
And it was fun for me in the beginning. I was like, oh, this is kind of cool. I can bring a cake to Boot Cafe, to Cafe Oberkampf, to Honor Cafe, and all these guys.
All the old OGs.
All the OG first wave of all this coffee stuff. And so it was just coincidental that I started baking while this first wave of coffee shops started.
Wow, so you're riding the wave. That's an Australianism.
Riding the buttercream wave, yeah.
But so did you have like a little sign saying Cake Boy Paris or something on it? Were you that social media savvy with it, or was it just that?
Actually, funny enough, I had the handle Cake Boy Paris before I even started baking, and it wasn't a reference at the time I chose that name. It wasn't a reference to that I was a baker. It was more that I was like always eating cake or pastry.
Yeah, right. Okay.
And for my friends back home who were watching, and in California, that's what I was trying to like. I was showing them all the pastries I was finding in Paris, and like eating them, and like posting bakeries. So that's kind of why that name came around. So it was kind of cool that it ended up being
funny.
Yeah.
Yeah, you just walk right into it. I want to talk about I want to get back to the States and talk about the difference between the cakes and stuff there. But flashback, we were both at an event at the American
Embassy.
Yeah, was it the embassy or the residence?
You're right. It was the American residence.
That fancy building there. So fancy that did we talk about at the time, those cakes that had the QR code on them? Did you see that?
Yeah, we didn't talk about it at the time, but I remember trying one.
Wow, how good was that? You scan it and then you eat it? I didn't even know. I didn't use it.
Yeah.
But I like it.
I mean,
Are you going to take it?
I kept having to pull my husband away from the lobster rolls that were out and like back to the pastry corners because there were a lot of beautiful pastries out at that event.
Well, America. We're talking about America. Are you from San Francisco?
So originally I'm from San Diego, Southern California.
Right.
I was born and raised in San Diego, and then went to university at UC Berkeley.
Okay. So you're a California boy.
I am very much a California boy.
Right. And when you say like you were missing those, like when you list, I know what chocolate cake is. I didn't really know what the other ones were, but there are an awful lot of listeners to this show who are in California.
Oh.
You're talking to your people here. How do those cakes, your traditional classic Californian American style, how does that compare to Paris?
So there's a lot of interesting differences, and it's funny how I would say one of the major sort of signatures of an American cake would be, of course, buttercream frosting. Mm-hmm. That isn't really something that you see in Europe in general. And of course, it's known for its famously sweet American stuff. Mm. It's basically icing, sugar, and butter, and maybe a splash of vanilla and milk. So it's covered how we cover our birthday cakes.
Yeah, sounds unhealthy.
It might not be the healthiest thing.
But you know, when I think of Californians, I might be way off. I think slim. Is that a thing?
I mean, maybe you're thinking of the Los Angeles,
I don't know what I'm
Santa
thinking.
Monica.
You tell me. Is that a LA thing?
Like,
is that it?
I think that there's still some interesting, distinct sort of personalities.
Very diplomatic, yes. Okay. But in Paris, people often consider Parisians to be very slim, which is given they do eat a lot of sweet treats.
Yeah.
That's odd. What's going on?
I feel like it might be the ingredients.
Here we go.
There's, there are no preservatives here in France. Yeah. They're a little more tightly regulated. And also just whole fruits, whole veg, and not a lot else.
Yeah.
Generally. And you're right. I feel like the desserts here are so rich. You have, chocolates and praline and all of these things. Yet, also I would argue in Paris, I can't speak to the rest of France, but Paris, of course, most people are walking all over the city all day.
True.
And of course, in addition, there's portion control. You don't really have the XXL sized, fraisier.
Right.
It's like a tiny little wedge of a cake.
Yeah.
It's not the giant, what we think of as maybe in the United States, it's a giant layer cake that has 5 layers and, one person gets a giant slice.
Except at is it Chez Genou where they give you a chocolate thing and you can eat until you explode?
The famous giant pot of chocolate mousse that they come over and just spoon it out onto your plate.
Is that what it's like in the States?
I mean, when it comes to cakes, they're big.
Yeah.
And generally you do eat only one slice. But
Right.
Yeah. I mean, there are the all-you-can-eat buffets and things like that. But I don't know, with desserts or cakes, it might be a little different.
And now that you've been here for 12 years, do you have a preference?
Ooh, okay. Well, here's what I've come to. I appreciate the artistry and craftsmanship in French patisserie, and I will always, want to look at them. Especially for me, it's become sort of a time and place with desserts. So when I go out for like a beautiful goûter in a beautiful hotel or something, I'm very happy to have beautiful gâteau opera in front of me or a charlotte, and I love it. It's this eating with your eyes before, with your stomach.
Yeah.
However, I would never turn down a homemade carrot cake. And that's probably what I would rather be eating with my coffee.
Interesting.
Than French pastry.
How important, like when I look at your social media and your lovely book, which we're going to get to in a second, it feels to me that beauty is very important to you, the looks of things. Why do you think that plays such an important part of it?
I guess I'd have to think about my background studying art history.
Cool.
Which, of course, is the study of the beautiful, the aesthetic world. And I think that for years, that's what I was involved with. When I worked at a museum in San Francisco, I was doing art education. And so looking at things was always part of what I was fascinated by.
Interesting. That's cool how that ties to food.
Yeah. And of course, food. Not to jump ahead too much, but getting into the book and my social media, oftentimes when I make a cake, the most fun I have in the cake making process is the end with the mise en scène of bringing everything together.
Yeah.
And sort of, sometimes being inspired by famous paintings or, the Dutch golden age of still lives. So I think that's something that I'm constantly is in my mind of like having to put everything together next to this beautiful window with the light coming in just right.
Yeah.
And that doesn't include only the cake. It includes all of the, the cake stand and the plates and the flowers in the background. So it's kind of like everything coming together.
That's cool. That's really cool. You've definitely got an eye for it. And same with the photographer for your book who did an exquisite job.
Joanne Pye. Thank you, Joe.
Thank you, Joe. Have you ever thought on social media or Instagram, that's where you're most active, isn't it, of sharing a horrible picture of a cake that fell on the ground and being like, oh.
That is interesting that you brought that up because while I was making the book, there were a lot of cake fails and cake moments and cake things that didn't work out. And I did start to kind of catalog some of those and just so I could see what not to do next time or what specifically happened to the cake. And there was a side of me that I thought it would be interesting to share these so-called cake fails because it happens to all of us. It happens to the best bakers out there. Yeah. It's totally, when I've heard many times people tell me like, wow, your cakes look so beautiful. They're so perfect. And I'm like, it took a lot of practice to get there and thank you. And also, no, like I still, after years and years of baking cakes, I still have many times when the cake just doesn't work out for whatever reason. Yeah. The oven was too hot.
Sure.
I overmixed the egg whites, something. And, it's a disaster. So I think that is interesting to share those fails, and I have struggled with to or not to share.
Well, I think who am I to tell anyone what to do ever? But I often think that, especially living in Paris, like if you compare our social media pages, mine's very ugly. Mine's very ugly. It is, and it's because firstly, I try and be a storyteller, and sometimes the text is more important to me than the picture, right? But I think sometimes a big part of life in Paris is when you. This is disgusting. I once saw a rat eating a dead rat.
Oh,
right. As you take a sip of coffee. I didn't want to take a picture. I probably did, but I didn't want to. Definitely not share a picture. But I was like, that's a moment in life. It's disgusting, but things like that happen. Yeah. And it occurred to me, what would happen to share that? Paris has such a pristine image for a lot of people. Let's not, sugarcoat. That's what I was looking for. Let's not sugarcoat it. There's an underbelly of this city that is definitely not beautiful, and I'm.
The amount of squashed pigeons that I walk by on a daily basis here, just jarring.
Yeah, from squashed pigeons. I don't want to get too far into this. I want to talk about sweet Paris.
Let's move back into buttercream.
Yeah. We took a detour.
Squashed pigeons back to layer cake, squashed cake.
Sweet Paris. The book starts with you saying you came to a supermarket in Paris. you're looking for strawberries.
Yes.
Can you give me, in your best 12 years ago French, how you asked for the strawberries to the lady in the shop?
Oh, it was probably brutal.
Go on,
and
then.
Something like, je cherche des fraises.
Yeah.
And of course, a very, honorary saleswoman replying that, Monsieur, c'est pas possible.
Yeah.
It's like, it's not, it's January.
Yep.
You have to wait until spring.
Yep. And your mind blown.
Yeah,
Hang
and
on.
mind blown.
Yeah.
Like, what's happening?
Strawberries are always available
California
back home.
year-round strawberries?
So how did that, that's a quick baptism of fire in the food world.
Yep.
You can't get what you want. What does that tell you about cooking and baking and life in a city like this?
I think my first reaction was this was a culture shock in terms of what was available and what wasn't, especially, and I speak to West Coast people specifically in the United States because my East Coast friends, have seasons and they are eating seasonally.
Sure.
California is just a special state where we're just like the fruit basket for the rest of the United States. So a lot is grown in California. So especially Southern California, where I'm from. So oranges and lemons and avocados and strawberries and all of that. So we have that year round. So I think for me, it was more of a culture shock to realize like, oh, wow, I'm having to wait until May, end of April, May to get a strawberry. And so I think my entire worldview on food and started to shift and change. And sort of that's one of the threads in the book that I wanted to really tug at and pull at was how sort of moving to France taught me to celebrate the seasons.
Sure.
And look forward to strawberry season and Maribel season, at the end of August, beginning of September, when for just 2.5 weeks, we have this plum, this magic little plum that is, in season and you're going to just eat it all the time and have it in tarts and jams and make a cake with it. And then you're going to wait again for the rest of the year until it's Maribel season again.
That's so cool. It makes me think that people in your job would be more like you'd have an inbuilt sort of resourcefulness, because you got to deal with what you got. Like you can't make your strawberry cakes in September or whatever the dates are. But also a patience.
Right.
Is that fair to say? Patient and resourceful?
Absolutely. And in fact, this is the perfect timing to bring that up because we're currently on the transition from winter to spring.
Yep.
And this particular time right now in Paris, the markets are sort of, that in-between stage. We're not quite into strawberries. They're starting to pop up, but they're not really ripe yet, or they're not the ones that you want to bake with potentially. And the winter fruits and veg are sort of on their way out. So this might be the perfect time of transition where you talk about where it's sort of like, okay, waiting, a little patient. You have to get a little creative if you wanted to bake something and look at things like chocolate, which is an evergreen, of course.
Yeah.
And then wait until the spring veg and fruit are, really bursting at the seams at the markets. And then you have access to all of the spring things.
Are you also a perfectionist, Frank?
I might suffer from a little perfectionism.
I've had a few bakers on the shows before, and I think that's part of the job, isn't it?
Yeah, it's definitely something that I think a lot of people and bakers specifically struggle with. And definitely for me, it's same. I try not to way too into that or lean too into that, but I definitely am guilty of, being a perfectionist when it comes to baking because there are so many times when you want to keep going and get it just right, but that's when you can always end up messing things up.
Yeah.
So I do these cake workshops at my house, and oftentimes that's been wonderful because to have people come over who may not have ever frosted a cake before, and, they're like, oh, do I keep going? I kind of want to keep fixing it. I'm not happy with it. And sometimes you got to just say, actually, it looks great. You should stop here because the longer you keep messing with it, it's just you're going to start tearing the frosting off your cake.
Right.
So it's sort of like finding that balance of like, okay, just know when to stop.
Yeah. I've never frosted a cake.
Really?
No.
Oh, we're going to have to get you
Should
and Lena
I come
over.
round?
I think you and Lena might have to come round.
Can you, space for 2 kids?
I have promised her, doing a little princess cake from Sweden.
Oh, yes, I remember that. You've got your cultural references on point today, Frank.
Well,
honestly.
I mean,
Princess Torta.
I won't give too much away, but I am working on book number 2 at the moment. There might be some travel-inspired things there.
Good. But book number 1.
Yeah.
It's divided by season.
Yes.
Which is kind of exactly what we talked about. So the way for people at home looking for sweet treats in their life, Sweet Paris, we got all the seasons in a row, 59 recipes, I think.
Yep.
Desserts that you can, I mean, what's the desserts for each season? Is that the idea?
Yeah, it's like basically baking through the seasons. What's in season and what ideas that you could use to bake something, whether it's for a special occasion or just for yourself or just for a goûter for one. And then the book ends with sort of a bonus chapter at the end, which we call Les Fêtes, which is sort of sweet recipes for really big blowouts and special occasions, possible like wedding cakes. There's like holidays throughout the year. Those are all at the end.
Right. Okay. So Sweet Paris, seasonal recipes from an American baker in Paris. I'll link to it in the show notes below as well as to the social media channels and stuff. You hinted at a second book. Are you allowed to do more than hint?
At this stage, I think it's in the hinting stage only. Yeah. I'm hard at work on the proposal. Yeah. Let's just say that. More to come.
Proposals I've heard are the worst thing ever.
Yeah, they really are.
Oh man, good luck.
Recipe developing is not for the faint-hearted.
Okay. Can we finish on, I hate to put you on the spot, and I don't think you'll like it, but I have to do it. Can you recommend somewhere to go for nice baked treats in Paris? And you're not allowed to just say French places.
Well, I will always throw my hat up for Mamiche.
Right.
They've made kind of a name for themselves in the last few years.
Is that the one up in Pigalle?
They have two.
Okay.
There's one up in Pigalle, and then there's one next to République.
Okay.
Very close to Holy Belly. And they have this vanilla choux that is probably the best I've ever tasted.
Vanilla choux. People at home, we're not talking SHOE here. It's not a choux. It's a what is it?
Puff pastry.
Puff pastry. CHOU. A vanilla
filled
choux.
with the most decadent vanilla pastry cream, vanilla bean pastry cream, and it's for the bargain price of €1.
No way.
Yeah.
Nothing's €1 in
Nothing
the
is
city.
This is €1, and it's like a €1 piece of heaven.
Oh, wow. Except there's often a queue at those places.
True. Mamiche has become very popular, and there are oftentimes a line to get in.
Okay.
But if you can have a little patience.
I'm going to do it. I'm going to get a thing, take a picture, and say that this is what Frank recommends.
Absolutely.
What about a newer place for coffee? We know all the old ones.
Well, two of my friends, actually. This is a friend place.
Friends. No, it's all right.
But
friends
it's beautiful.
Right.
It's a new coffee shop called Recto Verso.
And rings a bell.
It's in the third.
Yep.
And it's right near Square du Temple, right off of Rue des Archives. And it's a beautiful space. The guys are doing beautiful coffee. They're making homemade. Everything is homemade there. They have Basque cheesecake. They have sablé with chocolate, and a few other goodies that they're always swapping out. So
okay. Yeah. And what about, last question, an institution? Can be fancy, can be easy, but some place where you want to go when you're in Paris where you just got a ticket off to get some kind of a sweet treat.
Ooh, well, okay, this leans on the fancier side.
No, I love it. Fancy's good.
But I always say yes to the Ritz on Place Vendôme.
Who says no to the Ritz?
I mean, it's iconic.
Yeah.
I know it's,
No, I mean, people want to splurge.
But François Perret is the head pastry chef there, and I love all of his creations. And specifically when we get into spring and early summer, his fraisier, his strawberry cake, is one of my favorites. And this is just one of my favorite places to go and just really sit and have just like a whole decadent, goûter.
Do you go into that what is it called? The Salon...
Salon Proust.
Yeah, is that where you go for that kind of thing?
Yeah, so they have this is where you would go for like a traditional French tea time.
Yep.
So this is a very small salon with a fireplace, very cozy.
I've seen, I walk through there sometimes. It's not as a customer, as a walker.
Okay.
Just looking for celebs,
Right. Well,
no, sometimes I've been to the bar at the back, or use as a shortcut when you want to cut from Vendôme to the others.
Well, the good news too is that if you hesitate to go into a hotel like the Ritz for whatever reason, they have their new Ritz Comptoir at the backside of the hotel, which showcases all of his pastries in addition to a few special ones he's created just for the Comptoir. So that has its own entrance. You don't have to go through the hotel. You can go into the Comptoir now and have his madeleines and his cakes and his, his viennoiserie and everything. So
Brilliant tips. 3 great tips. And just like that, our time is up. So, Frank, thank you so much for coming to the studio. Thanks for bringing me a coffee as well. What a treat. Anyone that comes into the studio with a flat white coffee, you've got a place for life on this show.
My pleasure.
But thank you. Good luck with the proposal on the new book, and hopefully see you again soon.
Thanks, Oliver.
So there you have it, Frank Adrian Barron. His book, Sweet Paris, it's linked to in the show notes below. Follow him on Instagram too, Cake Boy Paris. He puts out absolutely lovely pictures of Paris and the sweet treats you can find there, often baked with his own 2 hands. Thanks to all the Patreon supporters for making this show possible. Patreon.com/The Earful Tower. Your membership unlocks a world of extra content, and it keeps it all going from my side. So a million thanks to you all for being members. If you're not yet a member, I just have this feeling today's the day that you sign up. I'll see you on the other side. Merci beaucoup, and au revoir.